όποτε είστε έτοιμοι, whenever you're ready.
Who is ready to take the floor? Please proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Ambassador. Thank you, everybody, for being here in our second day of the Kavala Summer School. It's a great pleasure to see not only all of you, but also all of you in this friendly and collegial fashion, in this round table, who indeed gives a sense of equality and allow us to share our thoughts in a friendlier and freer, so to speak, fashion. So, I will now take advantage, at least, of Babis's presentation before, because he did share some insight about security, if I'm not mistaken, in relation also to global economic and water affairs, and I'm going to rely to that in order to move on with my own presentation. Now, as you may have observed already, my title is slightly adjusted in comparison to what you can see in the schedule. It's structured so to be more generic than what you can see in the schedule, and it is security, state, regional, and water dimensions. Now, unlike most other presenters here who are either political scientists, economists, lawyers, diplomats, and so on, I am a historian, for good or ill, which means that I will take a bigger or smaller step into the past and try to share an insight on the status of security vis-à-vis state and waters, not only in our current times, but also in the past. And more specifically, in the past 2 centuries or so, by studying specific episodes related to security and the waters, especially here in our neighborhood in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, I will begin, first and foremost, by outlining what security is, by and large. What do we mean by security? Such terms that we listen every now and then in our everyday lives, but nonetheless, it becomes highly difficult to adequately define what we mean when you use them. Afterwards, I will move to my more specific case studies, major Eastern Mediterranean countries, that is, and especially I'm going to focus on 2 major examples. Greece, on the one hand, and the Ottoman Empire, and later on Turkey, on the other. While, from a thematic point of view, I'm going to begin with state security at first, and proceed with water security, oh, that's better, I believe, with water security in the second part of my presentation. Lovely. So security, if you can try not to steal too much out of my PowerPoint presentation. Sûreté, Sicherheit, in other European languages. What do you think when you think about security? Can you furnish, can you provide a couple of very short sentences while you are listening to that? Angelo? The absence of war. Let's stick to the first word you used, absence, that is, the absence of war, you mentioned. Any other ideas? Suggestions, Nikki? Protection of territories, that is. Okay. From what? Good, better. Do we have a third alternative? A third volunteer? Okay. So, protection or prevention from war, protection of territories, good, lovely. So these 2 elements fit quite well to what I'd like to suggest. So, to secure, to be protected from various threats. These threats can be either physical, war, diseases, famine, and so on and so forth, but also they can be epitomized in the protection, so to speak, of the political or the social regime. War against terrorism, we hear every now and then in the news. That is, the protection of the certain political and social system we live in, whether we like it entirely or not, certain violent challenges, so to speak, violent threats, okay? Or, of course, protection from external dangers, right? So, we have, on the one hand, internal, and on the other hand, external security. That is, threats that are coming from the inside of the state, if we can take that as a major unit of analysis, as a major category of analysis, and on the other hand, external threats against dangers that are coming from abroad, from overseas. International terrorism, as we suggested, is a threat belonging to the second category, while the first one can think about, for instance, the prevention of theft, of burglary, the maintenance of public order, and so on, so forth. And we have also a third category, which we're going to address later on in the presentation, the so-called word securitization of certain objects. That is, to make things an image, an object of security. We're going to delve deeper into that. Though now, things that we usually take as given nowadays, security as the prevention of war, security as the protection of territories, has not always been so, because you see terms and concepts such as security, terrorism, war, and so on and so forth, have their own historicity, as we usually suggest, okay? That is, their meaning used to be different in the past. The meanings of states and statehood used to be different some centuries ago. It was not the same as it is today. In that part of the world, in the Eastern Mediterranean, Greece and Turkey, as I suppose you may know already, did not exist eternally. Centuries ago, all these territories were covered by the multinational, multi-religious Ottoman Empire. Is that so? Have you heard about that? Yeah? Good, lovely. Right. And later on, the emergence of nation-states brought on Greece and Turkey to its place, to its position. After Greece emerged as a nation-state, I believe you know by and large when, a couple of years ago, we celebrated, or at least the Greek state celebrated, a certain anniversary, 1821. Rings a bell? Yeah, I believe it does. Right, so when Greece emerged as a nation-state, it tried to establish certain state institutions to, so to speak, safeguard its territories, okay? Good. So, as we can see in the map here, in this small parts of the world, of the Southern Balkan Peninsula, that was the tiny Greek state of the 19th century, while this vast blue-colored polity here was the Ottoman Empire, a substantial, great power, one could say, back in the day. Both states, though, either small or big, shared certain common traits, certain common characteristics. They both established forces of coercion, a police force, a gendarmerie, as it was back then called, styled after European institutions, okay? You can see here certain Greek and Ottoman gendarmes, police officers, who were entrusted in exactly safeguarding the safety, the security, the peace and prosperity and order of the land. Okay? This process exactly began in the 19th century, in the 1800s, went on in the interwar years. First half of the 20th century, 1920s, 30s, where states expanded their control. Both Greece and the newly founded, after 1923, Republic of Turkey, founded by who? The Republic of Turkey was founded by who? Angelo? Thank you very much, Kemal Atatürk. Tried exactly to cultivate, to expand their territorial control over their lands. They extended, they expanded their force of coercion, their police forces, okay, to maintain and safeguard the security of their realm, so to speak. Not only on the domestic level, but also at the external, the international one. Gradually, following the 20th century, states began to collaborate with each other in order to coordinate against international crime. International terrorism, that was the thought back in the day, could be countered only by coordinated state action. Because of that, especially after World War II, institutions like Interpol and Europol were founded, contributing exactly to this kind of international security, especially international political security. Right, so you can see here to get a rough image of the map as it was back in the day, not that different, you can say, from what it is today, but already in the mid-20th century, that map is not vastly different from what it is nowadays. So on the one hand, on the one bank of the Aegean, we have Greece, on the other, we have Turkey. Right? And this leads us exactly to the post-war years. That is, the years after World War II, okay? That was briefly mentioned, I believe, in Babis's presentation, right? Regarding the expansion of global commerce, of global flows, after the end of World War II. And in this time of strengthened, of increased globalization, security became an even more pressing concern, both at the internal and at the external level. Greece and Turkey, both states, despite, their differences, by and large, followed similar trajectories, so to speak, of state development. They both had police forces, they both cooperated, borrowed, so to speak, took influences out of the great powers of the day, the United States above all. They both used American expertise in the 1950s, 60s, 70s in order to expand their policing mechanisms. Okay? They both used that state mechanism, the police, in order to safeguard the governments, the political milieu, okay, the political regime. Communism, for instance, most notably, was in both countries under persecution until a good part of the 20th century. Once again, despite their other obvious differences. In both countries, for the sake of security, civic liberties were limited, at least until the end, relatively mid to end of the century, which is actually a witness of broader, of wider developments in global state formation, how states use these iron brands, so to speak, right? These tools of coercion in order exactly to keep their enemies in check, under control, right? Okay. So far, summing up the first part of the presentation, what have we learned so far? That states, are not ahistorical constructions. They haven't been here forever, or at least since the time of Pericles in classical Athens. No, they are creations by and large of the last 200 to 300 years. Most things we nowadays take as given. People outside wearing a police suits, Antonis until a couple of years ago wearing his military suit and being part of the military as a whole, were actually things of modernity. Your ID cards, passports, and so on and so forth. All these are tools of these state mechanisms in order to safeguard their internal and external security, using also a good deal of violence when it's allowed, limiting democratic freedoms in certain instances, or expanding this mechanism of control even abroad and cooperating with other states in order to combat supposedly common foes, common threats. So far, so good. Questions so far? I wouldn't wish to monopolize entirely the space, though I think that these questions about how states are using force were and shall be quite topical. I should be around the middle of the presentation right now, and I suppose you have already noted that I haven't used the word water so far, all right? Is that so? Yeah, because that's coming along right now. So we mentioned the term securitization before, right? What is securitization? Securitization is a speech act, so to speak, as it is called, right? To render, to make a thing, an issue, a matter of security. Among others, water can be securitized that way. Water can be an object of securitization. Even actor, so to speak, not the theater, a state actor, Drones, claim that water, or actually its source, is an existential threat for the state, for the nation. And therefore its preservation is the highest priority. Then water is exiting the realm of politics, so to speak, and it's becoming a matter of security. An indisputable, supposedly, that is, issue of its importance there can be no doubt, right? And especially in the time, in the days we live in, water security and water scarcity are highly topical issues, as Mr. Kouvelis outlined yesterday. Because predictions about the adequacy of water, of clean water in the coming years are rather bleak, I should say, right? In quite a few areas of the world which are going to face quite substantial water shortages by 2030. What do we mean, though, to be more precise, when we use the term water security? We referred extensively to the terms state security, national security, so on and so forth. But what about water security? This refers exactly to the reliable availability of an acceptable quality and quantity of water for health, livelihood, and production, coupled with an acceptable level of water-related risks. Meaning, in simpler words, that it is not enough to have just water of an adequate quality. We also need to have not too much water. Floods are not a good thing. I suppose you would agree with me to that, right? So we need to have clean water, consumable water, controllable water in normal quantities, okay, in order to be water secured. Otherwise, states, peoples, or regions are water insecure, and that's where problem begins. Let's take once again a bleak into history. Water scarcity. Even if we nowadays have advanced technology, means to store water and so on and so forth, like the things we discussed previously, that situation has not always been so. What do you think? Your ancestors, centuries or millennia ago, did they have access unrestricted to clean water? I get a no. Why? A bit louder, a bit louder. They didn't have the resources, so they couldn't, so to speak, take the force of nature, so to speak. Rivers, lakes, so on and so forth, could be found here and there, but still, centuries ago, people did not possess the capacity, the technology, exactly, to harvest, so to speak, the power of nature. So people from centuries to millennia ago did not have access to clean water. Okay? Most recently, that situation got improved. But alongside that, problems got more and more as well. In the past 2 centuries or so, the globe, as we have seen so far, has experienced dramatic changes. Okay? Let's take just a fairly small example. The example of perhaps the largest city near Kavala, that is Istanbul. I believe Istanbul is closer to Kavala than Thessaloniki. No, not exactly, but it's very close, closer than Athens. Okay, so Istanbul, a mega city by the standards of the day, a couple of centuries ago. The capital of the huge Ottoman Empire, right? A city that grew very fast in the 19th century, too many new inhabitants, and as such, it has extensive needs for clean and abundant water, though that was not the case. Dams, aqueducts were not in use, were not functioning, did not exist simply back then, and because of that, water insecurity, dirty water, polluted water, contaminated water, was the case for the Ottoman inhabitants of Istanbul. As was, accompanied that, infectious diseases. Infectious diseases related to water. Can you think of a case or two? Malaria. All right, yeah. More mainstream diseases, so to speak. Cholera, right? I searched for yet another word, yet another disease. All right, you can cheat a little bit. Typhus. Okay? So all these rather bleak circumstances, malaria, typhus, cholera, all these were quite, frequent in the daily, in the everyday life of, Istanbul dwellers. Okay? So water in the 19th and early 20th century in Istanbul has been quite dirty, which was actually the case with many more European cities, Hamburg, London, and so on and so forth. So Istanbul was not isolated, was the only one in that regard. So water and its security became a state, a security issue. Okay? Public health, a security issue. An issue that remains, actually, even after the downfall of states. Even if the Ottoman Empire came to an end with Kemal, okay, and replaced by Turkey, such long-term problems persisted. So how to tame the powers of nature, how to use the coercive power of the state, the forceful power of the state, in order to create exactly better circumstances, better living conditions, also as regards to water, was and remains a problem throughout the past century or so. Not only for the Ottoman Empire, but also for the Turkish Republic. One of the first, actually, priority of the newly born republic in the 1920s was a new law on waters by the Ministry of Health, okay? Investing in drinking water supply and the draining of swamps. Because as Nikki very well suggested, due to the existence of these entities, these units, so to speak, access to clean water for centuries was a substantial challenge, right? Later on, after World War II, trade, as Bobby suggested, was magnified, state coercion was magnified, and alongside them, efforts to have clean water were increased as well. Therefore, by the mid-50s, we have the Directorate General on State Hydraulic Works, the main Turkish state agency responsible for clean waters, for building dams, in general, for having, created works of public infrastructure to allow access to cleaner water. This model of the post-war states, where mainly the state actually invested in these large-scale projects, was modified, as elsewhere in the world too, by the 1980s, when states, including the Turkish states, was no longer able to exclusively fund such large-scale projects, like dams and so on and so forth. These were simply too expensive, and the private sector, private companies, had to jump in order to help fund such initiatives. Okay? And as we discussed in the previous section, water security is not entirely, not exclusively an internal security affair, can also be a matter of external security and of international relations. As you can see here from the southeastern Anatolia project in the 1980s, that included dams in the Tigris-Euphrates River, that is way inside the Near East, including Turkey, Iraq, and so on and so forth, where we can see that water security is turning here into a matter of international politics as well. Proceeding now to something perhaps a little bit more familiar to us, water security in Greece. As you may have perhaps noticed from the Greek natural milieu, natural environment, water does not exist in abundance in Greece, right? Since the ancient times, extended periods of water scarcity were a quite regular phenomenon. Even up to the modern day, even up to the 19th century, when even the Greek capital, Athens, for decades, was actually based for its water supply to the ancient Roman aqueducts of Adrian. Think a little bit about that. A supposedly modern capital city with hundreds of thousands of inhabitants based its water supply in a 2,000-year-old Roman work. I suppose that this cannot be called, a very high performance as regards technology. This started to change gradually into the 20th century, and especially in the interwar period in the 1920s, when the first dams and works of infrastructure were built. Those older, perhaps those older, have heard of the American company Ulen, which in the 1920s actually assumed the Herculean task of building the Marathon Dam. It exists until today, okay? Because the Greek state back then did not possess the know-how and the resources in order to construct such a huge work, and it was in need of foreign expertise, okay? That large-scale dam was functional for a good 30 years or so, until Athens, after World War II, became so big, so extensive, that its water was not enough, and it had to take its supplies by the Iliki Lake in Boeotia, okay? That supplied Athens also for a good deal of the 20th century. And following also a wider pattern in Greek public administration, as we have seen in the past half-century or so, with quite a few companies becoming public against the wider European norm. By 1980, we have also the creation of the public water company in Greece, our well-known EIDA. Coming slowly to the end of our second part of the presentation. In the first part, okay, we have gone through matters of state security more broadly. In the second half, though, we have attempted a short historical overview of what water security and insecurity is and used to be over the past 2 centuries or so in the Eastern Mediterranean basin. Okay? We have seen that water security and insecurity has been a recurrent and a global challenge throughout human history, and despite the elevated, capacity of human beings, of states, in the past 2 centuries or so to amass more resources problems kept increasing. Security, as we have seen, has taken multiple phases. It's a multifaceted and actually a quite liquid concept, okay? Which includes political and social security, the security of the social political regime, and also security of natural resources, of water, most notably. And actually, we have tried also to apply these theoretical concepts upon practical, empirical cases, not far away, but actually fairly nearby, in the Eastern Mediterranean, including the Greek and the Ottoman/Turkish example. Now, I would like to put a period here. I believe I have spoken for quite a lot. Not that much, for at least half an hour, I believe. Okay, but still, the presentation, I think, was quite dense in terms of historical data. And therefore, I'd like to shut up here and open the floor for any suggestions or remarks you may have.
No suggestions, no remarks. Everyone is very happy.
Everything's clear.
Let's begin. Let's get back. Okay. Now, do we still need this?
I don't know. Probably.
Probably yes. Well,
Yes.
let's keep it for good or ill. Right. Before asking you some questions, maybe, any initial thoughts or suggestions? Fabi.
I have a suggestion, which is safety as a concept for describing internal security, because it takes away the securitization that we described in the beginning. Because when we speak about security and we securitize everything from wearing masks as a security issue to having border control, which is an external threat. So when and this was something I learned from another colleague who explained to me that when you speak about safety as a way to describe a productive way to deal with threat within your community, your state, your local government, your federal, your central government, it takes away the securitization and it makes it more
Creative.
more creative, and also less securitized and threatening. It's different to speak about clean water like you did as a safety issue, public health issue, and it's different to say if our water is contaminated, we have a security issue. So as soon as you change the word security with safety for your internal security, because in the end it's again security, you manage to tilt the dialogue into a more productive and creative way that also make it more graspable for your civil society and your citizens. This is something that I try to implement when I think about this.
It also, works both ways. That is, things that could have been or could have more naturally been matter of security, such as political violence or political policing, it's quite useful for policy makers to use the term safety instead, to try and use a more neutral or supposedly neutral vocabulary. I remember a few decades ago when the United States were helping Greece in terms of rebuilding its anti-communist state after World War II. They have branded their project as a part of the Public Safety Office. Okay, not secured because that was too aggressive, so to speak. In other European languages, this is, of course, an issue more complicated because in German, as you very well know, we have the term Sicherheit, which infuses both safety and security, hence the conceptual difficulty. In French, I suppose the same, sûreté.
I think in Greek it's similar, no?
Asφάλεια.
Asphalt, it's both.
I don't think we have a different...
Exactly, that's the other thing.
So especially when addressing domestic, political audiences or social audiences in various countries, including Greece, it's more difficult to distinguish.
Absolutely.
or a greater opportunity not to distinguish exactly for various reasons and purposes. So, of course, conceptual issues remain always a matter at hand. Angelo? Very much, and I will further add another parameter to your very insightful comment. That is, this, interrelation between security and water, for that instance, also has an impact in inequality, not only at the local one. Why? Because in order exactly to supply a city, a mega city, let's say, with water, perhaps other areas, other regions have to be downgraded, right? Or have to be, away their own water resources. Somebody's gain is, in quite a few instances, somebody else's loss. Can be also, an impact of gender studies, right? Perhaps male communities can be more vocal, so to speak, in claiming access to clean water, leaving, in various instances, women or members of minorities more broadly having a lower voice.
Actually, we have this tomorrow. The first topic has to do with gender and access to clean water and sanitation, the gender aspects of these rules.
Bobby?
Yeah, this is maybe a question to foresee some things. I know that scientists do not like to look into the future, but maybe regarding the history that you already provided with very profound examples and also very local examples. We can all understand what Athens and Istanbul is. We live close by. How do you believe, after showing this history, will our approach to the securitization of water change regarding big fires, regarding water scarcity, pollution, as well as migration flows and migration concentration in certain areas that will create more need for water, not only to drink, but also for production, for cleaning, and other stuff. How do you think are we going to develop? Maybe you can choose. Do you want to speak as Greece or as the European Union or the West? I don't know.
Well, I'll choose instead the thematic approach by, using categories as migration, fires, and so on. Okay, does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Right. So, historians tend to be even more reluctant when it comes to predictions. Okay, because of course, these societies that, to a certain extent, I refer to were pre-modern, even pre-industrial, industrial to some extent. No, we live in a post-industrial society, and therefore trying to find examples to exactly imitate, copy-paste from the past as solutions, so on, is not always a very good solution. Instead, history can teach us a lot in terms of diversity, how to try and think out of the box, so to speak, how to see and take perhaps some examples of what has happened with migration before, and what kind of steps, actions, measures people have taken against or vis-a-vis, to use a more neutral term, migrants or fires, natural catastrophes. Well, and from that base, the predictions I can make based on my crystal ball down here are not very bright, I must say. So, the existence of megafires, so to speak, such as the one we recently have in Thrace, means that even larger quantities of water should be necessary in order to contain these natural phenomena. Quantities that actually have to be taken from other, of course, other occupations, okay? Which are not, as Mr. Kouvelis mentioned yesterday, are not going to be abundant, right? Likewise, migration flows, people who are at this time, at this moment, in Aegean Islands or in Thrace, they are in need of extent of increased water quantities. These are not available there. Water is going to be an even more prized, even more valued and securitized object, and a matter of political context, exactly, okay? And only, I believe, if we try to make the best possible use of the available resources, ideally within an institutional and legal framework that guarantees an acceptable, so to speak, sharing of water resources, then we can avoid, you know, future even military conflicts based on water. This is a prediction that has made that future military conflicts will have to do with water and water availability. But so far, I remain skeptical about to which extent such a framework can actually be applied. Okay, so chemicals, trades, international relations, gender.
Yeah, actually, I just want to ask, what are your majors? Because you mentioned chemistry, so maybe that would be useful for all of us. What are you studying? What is your... Okay. International relations, yes, you said that. Theology. Islamic studies. And international relations. Very diverse. Nice. Nice, thanks. So it's useful for us to know security from all different aspects. And actually, I want to bring into the discussion one aspect I think we have discussed in the past with Christos, that security is an illusion. Yeah, and actually, it's something that sometimes we feel we are safe, we need everything to be secure and safe, but it's not true, right? Because something may come up, something unpredictable, and then you find this. So a lot of times, right, you try to create this concept that, yes, I'm safe and I'm secure. I'm saying this, it's something that I have discussed with some US people when I was in Paris after the bombings in Bataclan and all the events that followed. I was there a few days later, and it was a scary environment because you could see the military in the streets and trying, you have a sense of security. And I was traveling the same taxi with some US citizens, and they told me that, after September 11th, we realized that security is an illusion because we thought we were safe and secure where we were, but no one is secure and safe. Well, no matter what you do, something, can always come up. So
in a way, security is an expression of our fears.
Right.
Yes,
yeah, exactly.
Projection
of our fears.
Yeah. Just to mention another example, similar in a way to what Maria mentioned. I was in the Athens-Thessaloniki train just 24 hours before the Tempe crash. So, yeah, and I used to take that train every week, actually. I have the thought of actually taking the train the next day, in which case, yeah, well, So, and in Greece at least, we used to think the trains are among the safest, potentially public, owned vehicles, more than airplanes, more than cars, buses, and so on and so forth. And still, that was not the case. Once again, as we mentioned before, human error. It's not war, it's not aggressive act, it's not a natural catastrophe, it's human error. What kind of measures can we have against that?
Tell me something.
Yeah.
Safety is the feeling we have, but security is are measures imposed by authorities and the government so that we feel safe. Is that correct?
There is, I would say that there is no correct or incorrect.
Safety is our feeling, but we get this feeling when governments and competent authorities are applying measures so that we feel safe. Could we do this separation?
Not necessarily,
so,
you said.
yes,
No,
I-
they don't. So,
Not necessarily, because I mean, some other movies can cause more fear to some other group
yeah, I see.
the same society.
Yes, but this is not the rule. It is a deviation of measures taken, because generally governments, they take measures for security so that we all feel safe.
Yes, but if we think of the Paris attacks, for example,
If you,
if we think of the Paris attack, for example,
Paris attack.
which one?
around 20,
Yeah, the Bataclan attack. Yeah.
Bataclan or
Yeah.
before
Yeah, the
or
Bataclan.
after?
because Charlie Hebdo,
Charlie Hebdo.
Charlie
attack.
Hebdo, yeah, that's why.
that Paris attack,
Yes.
and the Islamophobia that was created afterwards, I don't think that that is the exception.
So you mean there were measures that were taken for security, and some Muslims felt that they've been marginalized by society or by other citizens? Group. No, we're talking about millions.
Yeah, yeah.
We're
But
talking about
I'm thinking
millions.
that the framework is given by the government, and it is made or imposed or applied so that we all
Or
feel
it-
safe.
Or it should, at least.
Yes, it should. And then, okay, it is a system. Many factors, they enter. There is an input from different groups, interests, terrorism, etc., criminality. But the framework is there. The laws are there. And the laws are not applied to threaten certain groups or marginalized persons in the society. This is my question. I like to see if it is possible, but it is more philosophical, if there are two separate terms, or in both are included security and safety.
Okay. So I believe this question relates to what Babis asked before about the relation between safety and security, and there is no clear conceptual distinction between them. Security is entering into safety's realm, so to speak, metaphorically speaking, and vice versa. No, in theory, safety is, so to speak, less used in the political discourse, in the political sphere, and therefore it likes to remain more neutral in comparison to the more aggressively oriented security concept, okay? But it's exactly the reason that policymakers, bureaucrats, so on and so forth, may use these two terms interchangeably, especially in languages like Greek, where there's no clear distinction between them, just asphalia or Sicherheit, in order exactly to emphasize the concepts, the meaning, to prioritize the agenda they want first. And when it comes to the point mentioned earlier that laws, security, and institutional framework is designed to safeguard all, everybody. Well, it depends, I may say, on who the enemy is. If the enemy is internal, say in Greece, a few decades ago, if the enemy were communists, okay, then that institutional framework, φάκελοι κοινωνικών φρονημάτων, files of social beliefs, could be used against a part of the population. Okay, these were Greeks as well, but still.
No, I'm asking in the Anglo-Saxon academia, what is the definition for security and what is the scientific definition for safety. So as simple as that.
Is it as simple as that? Can it be? I mean,
No, I'm asking, is there, no, because in German we don't have this.
Yes, but there is.
Yes, but for Sicherheit or for both?
No,
For Sicherheit. No, I'm asking, in the theory,
no.
international relations or what is security definition? Just the definition. And what is safety for international relations?
okay. And I reply that there are certain traits, certain characteristics, of course, protection, certain threats, but still no, there is no universally accepted definition of what
Thank
safety and security
Okay.
is. I recall a couple of years ago, I was reading a book about policing, so a cognate, a related term, so to speak, by a renowned policing expert, Jean-Paul Brondet, and he concluded that after decades of research, he had to reach no exact conclusion of what policing is. Policing could be identified as its security can be identified as regards the context is mentioned as a term, as a reality, as a practice, but still in theory there is no universal three-line definition, so to speak, in a dictionary entry version.
There is no clear definition because definitions change. You cannot put it together and say this is the absolute definition, but there are definitions. And the easiest definition between security and safety in the English language when it comes to speaking about these issues in theory is that security is external, and safety is internal. So everything inside the borders is safety, and everything outside the borders is security. And everything that has not to do with the use of violence in terms of weapons is security. So a river that overflows is a safety issue. Losing electricity because there was an earthquake is a safety issue. Losing electricity because of a terrorist attack is a security issue.
Okay.
Because there is violence involved. So this is this is something where the scholars agree on. One is internal safety, the other one is external security. And when there is violence, strong violence, and weapons, we talk about security again.
And even so, even when it comes to internal issues, terrorism, for instance, the Ottoman Empire, left-wing terrorist organization in Greece, that was a matter of internal, though, security,
Yes.
on the other hand. So perhaps that distinction between, strictly speaking, internal and external within borders and overseas, abroad, again, can take a few exceptions, or naturally created and man-created.
Thank you very much.
If there are no more questions or remarks,
Εχθές.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
no, please.
Is that the reason why migration flows outside EU territories are insecurity and speech, and the migration flows to Ukraine are a safety issue?
Once again, this is all
Yep.
a political issue. This is a political, I would say, yeah. Because, well, I would try, if I may, to be a little bit blunter on that. Am I allowed to so?
Yep.
The Ukrainian issue, Ukrainian refugees are a safety issue because the European Union is in favor of them for political purposes. If for some other reasons or in some other context, in some other case, the European Union was against them, that would be a security issue. Okay? If in the future the EU turns against Ukraine, I'm very much afraid that this will turn from a safety to a security issue. That the Ukrainian incomers could suddenly turn into dangerous individuals, okay? Threatening, so on and so forth. It's a matter, of course, always of political instrumentalization. And I mean, even in chemistry, even in the natural sciences, we usually think that in the natural sciences, in chemistry, lies the truth of science. But how exactly this truth is manipulated, how it's used, what data are revealed in the public and how they are emphasized or downplayed, this is always a matter of politics.
A lot of times one can see studies that says this product is safe for consumption, this is not safe, but then you need to see behind who funded the research, and maybe it was that food company that funded the research, and all these things.
What's the sample taken?
Right. I have a statistician friend that says there are liars, dumb liars, and statisticians. So then, that's what they say in the US, because you can always manipulate your sample, your data, and give it an explanation.
Who sets the framework?
Yeah. So there you need philosophers with ethics, right, to set the framework through ethics, an ethical type of concern.
Do you feel safe and secure in this seminar?
Absolutely.
After these questions, I'm not sure. No.
After your questions, perhaps not that so.
Okay.
Well,
So-
to be frank, I feel that this particular setting of the roundtable is safer and more secure
Yes.
than what we had
Yeah,
yesterday.
yes. For you, for sure. I'm not. You already said yesterday you don't feel very well.
Well, I felt like, the pain in the great inquisitor, ο Μέγας Ιεροκριταστής. Okay.
So the next presentation is via teleconference, right?
Yes.
And at 2:30,
Έχει πάρει σίγουρα το...
Ναι, μου απάντησε ότι το πήρε.
the Zoom link. Yeah.
Then, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I don't know if there are other presentations related to some activities for the students. What we are going to do is tomorrow we will have